Right, we shall get cracking. Okay, so thank you for coming back, guys. Thank you for coming back to the online school. Thank you for coming back to English and to see me again. So we're hopping over to English literature today. So we're going to be doing some more power and conflict poetry. We're going to be looking at Poppies by Jane Weir, which I think is a really nice poem. I think relatively straightforward. It's not a really complicated one to understand. As I suppose sort of the more modern ones are for us generally. However, there are exceptions to that rule. For example, tissue is really tricky. So we're going to be looking at that today. So if you guys don't know me, I'm sure you all know me. My name is Vicki. Did my English teacher training last year, and I've done about 430 lessons, I think, with MyTutor now. Well, sort of since I last spoke to you, I've done maybe about 10 more. Right, so I shall get cracking then. So lesson objectives, sort of the same sort of thing as usual. Timing wise, so we'll do sort of around 45 minutes or so teaching, 15 minutes at the end for questions, that sort of thing, and rounding off. Bolla's here at the start, and she'll be back at the end. She's going to chat to you guys a little bit right at the end as well. As always, if you've got any questions, stick them in the Q&A or the chat. I generally look at the chat more than I do the Q&A just because it's more popular, but I will keep both of those open as we go along. Right, so let's get going then. So understanding the meaning behind Poppies is sort of the main one, and understanding what an effective exam response is effectively, which is what we've sort of been gearing up to do for quite a while now. So to start off with, I've got a tiny little Kahoot. I think it's only like maybe 5-6 questions. It's just some little World War I, World War II history, just to help us a little bit with context. Obviously, we're writing as Poppies. Poppies became sort of the emblem for lost soldiers for us in the First World War, and obviously then again in the Second World War. So just sort of making sure that we know sort of when those events are happening, sort of the very basics. I'm sure most of you already know anyway. But there might be the odd couple of bits and pieces that you don't know. So I'll put that up, and I will put that in the chat for you as well. Oh, can you let me know if you still can't hear me? So I've popped the website and the game pin into the chat for you guys. We're going to have some very quiet people here today who don't want to go on the Kahoot. There we go, we've got one on. That makes me feel a little bit better. We've got very many of us today, have we? I'll give you another minute to hop on, and if we've only got just the one on, then we won't worry about it. Bolla, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can, Vicky. Your volume's great.
Right, Christine, I mean, have you checked to see if your volume's up or anything? I'm talking to you, you can't hear me. Right, okay, got 3 of you on. Let's get cracking then. So they're pretty straightforward questions. I'm sure most of you will know the answer to. Hopefully there might be one that you don't know. So how long did the First World War last? Sort of like a generic pub quiz questions, these. Yeah, everyone gets a podium. That's the positive to only having 3 of you guys. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, 4 years, so 1914 to 1918. What triggered the start of World War One? This is one that you either know or you really don't. Yeah. So I think were the Black Hand gang that assassinated Franz Ferdinand, and that kicked everything off. Which years did World War II take place? Fabulous, yep, 39 to 45. Which of these countries were not allied with the UK in World War II? So weren't on the same side as us? Yep, Japan. The USSR was Russia. I can't remember what USSR stands for actually, but yeah, Japan were not on our side. Wilfred Owen, that should say Owen, not Owen, fought in which war? World War One. Yeah, I've got another Kahoot at the end. It's one that we've done before, but I thought would be worth returning to. So there will be another one, don't worry. And why did Japan surrender in World War II? I think I've mentioned this before. Yeah. So America dropped 2 atomic bombs, one on Hiroshima. Hiroshima was the first one, and the second one was on Nagasaki. But we don't really tend to hear about Nagasaki. It's only ever Hiroshima, but there were 2 bombs. Fabulous stuff. Right. So let's get cracking with the poem then. So a little bit more on context. So I suppose I've given you sort of like general numbers and history there. So in terms of context for Jane Weir, so she's born in Italy, moved over to Ireland. She's lived in Manchester for a little bit as well, but moved over when the Troubles were going on, where conflict was happening. So she witnessed some form of conflict, although she wasn't directly involved. She was living near those problems at the time. She decided to write Poppies from a mother's perspective, and she specifically focused on Wilfred Owen's mother. So obviously Wilfred Owen wrote Exposure, which is in this bundle, and Dulce and Decorum Est is the other big popular one as well, that's on different exam boards. Wilfred Owen is the war poet essentially. So she, I suppose, writing a poem, if you're going to write it from and try and get it close to poetry and a particular perspective conveyed by another poet, Wilfred Owen would be the obvious choice. So she specifically focused on how she thought Wilfred Owen's mother would have reacted to him being called up and reacted to him dying. He died very, very late in 1918. I think he missed out like on the war ending by a matter of days or weeks. So he was incredibly unlucky in terms of well, obviously you're incredibly unlucky if you have to go to war, but he almost made it to peacetime at the end. So how does Weir present feelings of loss and grief in Poppies? So I thought that was probably the sort of nicest, the broadest question I could give you guys. Obviously in the exam you are given a poem, so for example Ozymandias, and it says describe how power and conflict is shown in this poem and compare it with one other poem. Now obviously when I'm teaching you individual poems, it's difficult to do comparisons, hence why I've come up with sort of a big topic question to answer instead. But I'm going to go through with you guys what I think would work well in terms of comparison, and talk you through why I think that. And I've got a resource to show you which I find on TES, which you can pick up for free, which is really, really good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through the poem as usual, then I'm going to go through and annotate it, and I've got my flatters table back up because I haven't done flatters in a very long time with you guys, so I thought I would bring that back for today's session just to refresh your minds. Right, okay. Let's get going on the annotating then. So as usual, if you want to suggest things, please do pop them up in the chat. I'm going to get the chat up actually before I get going. Right, okay. So, oh, I've got stuff in Q&A. Right, there isn't that many of us today. I think there's about 10 of us. And we'll come back to that question at the end of the session, the one about other sessions. Right, okay, 3 days before Armistice Sunday, and poppies have already been placed on individual war graves. Before you left, I pinned one onto your lapel, crimped petals, spasms of paper red disrupting a blockade of yellow bias binding around your blazer. Sellotape bandaged around my hand, I rounded up as many white cat hairs as I could, smoothed down your shirt's upturned collar, stilled the softening of my face. I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose, play at being Eskimos, like we did when you were little. I resisted the impulse to run my fingers through the gelled black thorns of your hair. All my words, I haven't got my mouse plugged in. All my words flattened, rolled, turned into felt, slowly melting. I was brave as I walked with you to the front door, threw it open, the world overflowing like a treasure chest. A split second and you were away, intoxicated. After you'd gone, I went into your bedroom, released a songbird from its cage. Later, a single dove flew from the pear tree, and this is where it has led me. Skirting the churchyard walls, my stomach busy, making tucks, darts, pleats, hatless, without a winter coat or reinforcements of scarf gloves. On reaching the top of the hill, I traced the inscriptions of the war memorial, leaned against it like a wishbone. The dove pulled freely against the sky, an ornamental stitch. I listened, hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind. So it's a really interesting poem. It's written in free verse. So we've talked about free verse before. So we can pop that straight into our flatters table. So free verse is essentially there's no clear sort of rhyming scheme, stanza length. There's no massive structure to it essentially. So we've got a lot of irregular stanzas. It is incredibly irregular in that there aren't patterns there. Now, our big question is why bother to do that? You know, you have ballads, you have sonnets, which are really controlled and have lots of rules, and then you have free verse. And I think typically, if I was going to write a poem, I would write in free verse because I'm not skilled in any way at doing poetry, and it's the easiest one because you don't have to worry about rhyming, you don't have to worry about how many syllables you've got in a line. But obviously people who are writing and are poets for a living are very capable of doing those sorts of things and are highly skilled. So writing in free verse must be a choice for them. So therefore, why have they chosen to do that? And I think, as this is based on a mother mourning the loss of her son who was a soldier, I don't think it specifically says whether it's first or second, and I'm not sure whether she's actually sort of mentioned whether it's sort of First or Second World War that she's based it on. But the free verse here, I think, sort of symbolises a loss, and that loss of, I suppose, structure to her life, which is caused by the loss of her son. Oh, thank you, Adam. Is it second? Yeah, it's one of those things which I've looked up and thought, I can't remember. So, yeah, I would be inclined to say, although she was thinking of sort of how Wilfred Owen's mother would think. So that would be World War I. Anyway, it doesn't matter too much. Right, okay, so in terms of form and structure, so we've decided form and structure. Caesuras and enjambment, there are a lot of those in here. So let's so there's absolutely loads in terms of enjambments. You've got the first and second lines of enjambment. You've got the caesura here. You've got the end of the line punctuated there. Got caesuras going on much more frequently as it goes on. So the question is, why bother to do that? So it's mainly going on in the second stanza. So you've got still the softening of my face, and then like we did when you were little, black thorns of your hair. So it's almost, I suppose we could say, symbolising sort of potentially the perfectness that's so the son I suppose is unchanging, because she can't, these memories won't change, and he won't change because he's dead. Therefore you've got these abrupt stops, so those stops could signify his death. The enjambment, there's a lot of enjambment going on in here. Ah, okay. I'm interested now. Yeah, no, well, Armistice Day, I was right in thinking that. I wanted to double check. Every year we have an Armistice Day. So 1918 World War, end of World War I was the first Armistice Day. But we still have Armistice Day every year on the 11th of November. And then Armistice Sunday, which is the closest Sunday to the 11th of November. So that's that. So it doesn't say anything here. It doesn't specify a particular war. I'm sure there is. So it says World War I there. I would be inclined to say World War I because of the Wilfred Owen link. Right, okay. So there is absolutely loads of enjambment. Now, I would say the enjambment is because there is a really strong flow of thoughts and emotions when she thinks of her son. And a lack of control. So I'm trying to read what Adam's messaging me whilst I'm speaking. Right. World War II, she's based it off Wilfred Owen. Several links to the poem to indicate the Second World War. Ah, right. It's Second World War because she wouldn't be pinning a poppy to his lapel before the end of the First World War, because that's something that came out of the end of the First World War, so it would be the Second World War. But trying to draw on Wilfred Owen's mother's experiences. There we go. Right. Worked it out in the end. Okay, so let's go through language devices, because they're always nice and straightforward to do. Right, 3 days before Armistice Sunday, and Poppies had already been placed on individual war graves. So we've got a little bit of symbolism going on there. We all know what a poppy is for, don't we? We know why we wear one. Before you left, I pinned one onto your lapel, crimped petals, spasms of paper red. Now, I think spasms of paper red, I think that is almost a metaphor for blood loss. It definitely is incredibly negative. And then disrupting a blockade, I think that also draws a comparison to war. And then we've got the yellow bias binding around your blazer. So we've got a little bit of alliteration going on there, but it's not particularly exciting. So I don't think I would bother commenting on that. So bias binding, if you don't know, is a particular kind of stitch. So how's best to describe it? So it's essentially a bit of tape. So say that's your tape, you fold it over, and then on the edge of what you are sewing onto, so on my cardie, then I'd sew down there, and that would be the bias binding. So it's almost like a yellow tubing, an outline on his blazer. Right, sellotape bandaged around my hand. So then you've got reference to injury going on here. I rounded up as many white cat hairs as I could. So generally this seems quite mundane, doesn't it? And I suppose represents everyday life. Smooth down your shirt's upturned collar. So I think there's definitely this is very quite childlike. Your mum's sorting that out for you. Could the Poppy predict that he's going to die? Is it simple as it? You could definitely make that as an argument, Adam. Yeah, that's really lovely. So it's symbolising that he's going to die because it's symbolic of the loss of a soldier. That's really nice. It's almost like foreshadowing, I think, what you're suggesting there. So that's a really nice interpretation. Yeah, that's lovely. Right. I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose. Play at being Eskimos like we did when you were little. So you've almost got sort of a structural little mini flashback here. Reflection. I resisted the impulse to run my fingers through your gelled black thorns of your hair. So we've got another metaphor going on there. Black thorns, I suppose. We know he's young anyway. In my mind, he is a boy soldier. He is 18. But I could entirely be wrong. But that's how it's conjured up in my mind, that he's still quite reliant on his mother. He's still vulnerable. He's still living with his mother. And obviously in this time period, you would be more likely to move out at a younger age. Right. All my words flattened, rolled, turned into felt. So you've almost got, you've got a rule of three going on at the end of here, but it runs over onto the next stanza, slowly melting. This is sort of signifying an end, melting, sort of being to lose. So here you've got a rule of three, but then it goes on to the next one. So that's a bit of an iffy interpretation, I would say. I was brave as I walked with you to the front door. So I think this is very much parallel. And I don't know, I find it a bit odd to say that she was the one that was brave. Although she doesn't say you weren't brave, I just think it's an odd thing to focus on her rather than him. Right, blackthorns are an implication of being young, as you would normally see someone with that haircut when they're young and vulnerable. Yeah, this could link to how he might have gone into the war as a boy and wasn't allowed to grow up in his mother's perspective. Absolutely. Yes, so she refers to sort of wanting to touch him and play with him like you would do a small child and play Eskimos, and she doesn't seem to quite let go of being a mother to a young son, and he's now a man, or perhaps transitioning from sort of a child to a man, and she hasn't had the time to process and sort of turn him into a man in her own mind rather than her little boy, which again makes me think that he was probably very young. Right, what we got? So to the front door, threw it open, the world's overflowing. So another metaphor there, like a treasure chest rather. So we've got a simile. A split second, we've got sibilance. Oh, how have I done that? Sibilance. And you were away, intoxicated. So to me, intoxicated, if you said you're intoxicated, that would either mean you are really in love with somebody or you're very drunk. But it's not either of those things. So I think she's suggesting that he's intoxicated by the world being at war and a loss of innocence. Yeah, Adam, that's lovely. So stuck into something very enthusiastic. I think probably sort of being taken away with this sort of having to fight for your country, being really patriotic and thinking it's a good thing to do when in the grand scheme of things, fighting isn't, and sort of that loss of innocence because you're seeing horrific things. Right, after you'd gone, I went into your bedroom, released a songbird from its cage. So we've got sort of and this is filled with metaphors. So with this, I would say this is sort of essentially him growing up, releasing and sort of fledging the nest. Later, a single dove. So we've got some beautiful symbolism here. So dove meaning peace, obviously. Flew from the pear tree, and this is where it has led me. Skirting the churchyard walls, my stomach busy, making tucks, darts, pleats, hatless, without a winter coat or reinforcement of scarf, gloves. So she's being led by the dove to a reference to Christianity, so where his memorial is. So to me, there seems to be still a very sort of, still there is a belief of, sorry, I'm just reading what Adam sent to me. So I don't think she's lost her faith, which I find really interesting. And we've got this semantic field here, which is bizarre. So semantic field of sewing. So tucks, darts, and pleats. I'm not sure about hatless, but I would probably say are sort of things that you sew into clothes. So darts are sort of the things that are sewn into your shoulder blades for the breadth of your shoulders on a shirt. Tucks is sort of to do with tucking in. Pleats is sort of, you mainly see in skirts or kilts, the overlapping of materials and it being sewn on top so they fold onto each other rather than being like that. They're like that. Those are pleats. I've no idea about hatless. Reinforcements, yeah, so that could definitely be terminology, as you said, to sort of be symbolic of going to war. On reaching the top of the hill, I traced the inscription on the war memorial, leaned against it like a wishbone. So we've got another simile going on here. The dove pulled freely against the sky. So I really like this idea of freedom. So we've got peace and liberty and freedom all going in together there, which I think is a lovely melting pot. An ornamental stitch. So again, this is referencing sewing, embroidery. It mentions bias binding right at the start. So there's a load of terminology to do with sewing. Obviously, at the time, you had schemes like make, do, and mend, where you didn't buy new clothes, new materials to make clothes. You just made do with what you had, because supplies were low. You had rationing on material, so you couldn't just go off and buy a few yards of whatever you wanted to make, whatever fabric you wanted to use. So I think that's a really nice and I think quite a motherly thing to do. It definitely reminds me this is the sort of thing that my grandmother definitely, if she had the ability to write poems, she would use this sort of thing in there. Something which we don't really do so much anymore. Hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind. So again, you've sort of got a sense of loss going on here, right at the bottom, and a little bit of alliteration, but also sort of, again, the reference back to him being a little boy, and he's not a little boy. Right, so language devices. I'm not going to worry about writing them all in because we know. So attitudes of the poet, the narrator, the speaker. So we've got a first person narrator here, who is a mother. Adam's sending me loads of fantastic stuff today. Right, she feels as if he will come to her through the use of hoping to hear your playground voice. Yeah, it's almost a sense of trying to cling on to hearing things which you can't quite hear. Right, so first person, so we've got a mother who there's a lot of grief and pain going on. She doesn't seem to be angry though, and she seems to mainly remember her son. As a child rather than a young man who's gone off to war. Themes, so I think obviously the obvious ones are are pain and suffering, grief, loss. I suppose you could put in sorrow, power of humans. And I suppose power of nature in some way, because nature can help towards the death of soldiers. Emotivity. So what's interesting is I don't think there's a political message in this. I think this is very much a sort of personal letter to her son. So I think this is sort of very somber, but I think it's really quite intimate. And because it's directed at him, it's almost like a window into her mind, her thoughts. And then, has it not uploaded on the other side? So, it's been such a long time since I've done this, I can't remember what the R and the S stand for. The S is sounds. Reader's response, I think. So, I generally think our response is is tinged with sadness, but I think the focus is very much more on the mother and the mother's feelings rather than the son and the ordeal he went through and faced an incredibly early death. And I suppose we share a certain portion of grieving as well. Right, how are we doing for time? So I think what I will do is I will upload my answer rather than modelling it. So we've got time to do the quiz, and I've got time to show you a couple of other bits before we finish off. So, reminder of the question, how does Weir present feelings of loss and grief in Poppies? Weir presents feelings of loss and grief in Poppies by writing in the first person. So I'm just reusing most of the vocab that's in that question. And then I've embedded my evidence before you left, and then I put the / there to show that I know that that's where the line end is and a new line begins. I pinned one onto your lapel. This perspective allows the poet to convey the feelings of the family members left behind from war and the pain and suffering caused to parents who have lost their children. The reflective tone in this line demonstrates that Weir is feeling a sense of pride tinged with sadness, recalling a distant memory from her past. The pinning of the poppy may be symbolic in presenting the idea of patriotism. So I'm thinking about, so generally, this country is incredibly patriotic about wearing a poppy. Almost all of us do. When you're at school, you've always got someone coming around with a little money box trying to sell you poppies when it comes around to November. So it's a really big thing in this country, as well as the love and care a mother has for her child. So generally it's quite general so far. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the description now. Weir goes on to describe the colour of the poppy, spasms of paper red. So I mentioned that I thought that was quite an odd choice. So the use of the verb spasms creates connotations of pain and suffering, which could be a metaphor for the loss of blood on the battlefield. The speaker here seems to add details onto the event which she had not considered before, which could, in a sense, be a way of exploring grief and anger for the loss of her son. So what I'm trying, and I don't think I've written that particularly well. I think it could be clearer, and I've read it out loud, and there's at least 2 pain and sufferings in there. So I changed one of those, I think, after reading it over for a second proofread. So I'm trying to sort of hint at the fact that this is all very reflective. It's sort of rose-tinted glasses, and she's adding on things that she didn't think of at the time. When you hold a memory really precious to you, you tend to say, oh, I felt this at the time, which you didn't, but you do now, and that's how you feel about that memory now, and it changes as life goes on. Weir very much allows the speaker to reminisce the innocence of childhood and the care a mother always carries for her child, even when they become grown adults. Play at being Eskimos like we did when you were little. The reflection and comparison to youth could inform the reader, so I'm being tentative by using could, so could inform the reader that the mother still wishes and longs for the days past where she could play with her child. The use of enjambment may also reflect a fleeting thought which comes quickly, and that should be is uncontrolled. This could show that the speaker is lost in her memories of her son's childhood. So I'm getting a little bit of structure in there as well, just showing that I'm not a one-trick pony and only talk about language devices. The poet chooses to reference Christianity in this poem, which could indicate a sense of hope in the world, as she has been unable to lose her faith even after the untimely death of her son, skirting the churchyard walls. So I think it's always something that blows me away when someone's had something so awful like this happen to them and they haven't lost their faith. I find that absolutely amazing. So there must be that sense of hope in them. The verb skirting may indicate the tentative nature of the mother approaching the war memorial her son's name is inscribed on. This in turn may symbolise her unwillingness to accept his death. On reaching the memorial, she leaned against it like a wishbone. This simile appears to show a sense of physical weakness in which the mother's loss is manifested through. The comparison to a wishbone also suggests that although the mother is broken by the death, she still believes that the world can be good. So a wishbone is a bone that's sort of shaped a little bit like a triangle, and you're supposed to break it, and the person who gets the bigger part of the bone, they get to make a wish. That's what a wishbone is. The use of the symbolic dove is utilised in this poem on more than one occasion. The dove pulled freely against the sky. Doves are commonly associated with peace. This therefore could demonstrate that as we are now experiencing peacetime, the mother is able to see hope for the country and the world. The poet furthers this symbolism by using the adverb freely to suggest a sense of liberation and freedom within the world, which could signify a sense of healing and inner peace, which the war had previously taken from the world. So I think I've done some really deep analysis there and taken it really far. I think with this, it's really important to talk about the symbolism. So I think you really need to, if you're looking at this poem, you really need to talk about the doves. You really need to talk about poppies and sort of the themes of childhood and how they are presented. I think those are probably the 3 big important things to look at for this poem. Right, so first-hand experiences is a theme in there as well. I hadn't written down war, death, religion, the obvious ones I haven't written down. So in terms of poems to compare to, because she had based this on how she thinks Wilfred Owen's mother may have felt, I think I would go for Exposure. That would be such a nice parallel, and sort of 2 sides of the argument, essentially, sort of the pain of the person at the war and the pain of the person who's left behind. I think that amalgamation would be fantastic. Bayonet charge, again, on the battlefield, which is nice. I don't think it's as nice as the other three. The emigre, which is all about sort of having to emigrate because of war. So that's sort of a nice one about sort of being affected by war, but you're not actually fighting in it. And kamikaze, you can pretty much compare with anything. But that's, again, sort of a person who has been affected by war but hasn't fought. So that would be a really nice comparison and sort of retelling of memories and stories. Let me just click the chats. Wouldn't it be a bit of an overused comparison because everyone will be using it? To be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know whether all your teachers are saying use exposure, use Wilfred Owen, because some teachers might not have come across that little nugget of information. And you're not marked on originality in this. There is no sort of two poems where it's, if it fits nicely and you do a good job, that's fine. But if everybody chooses to do Poppies and exposure, you won't lose marks because everybody does it. There's a reason why everybody does it. So I'd say don't worry about it. You're not going to be marked down because you've chosen to do an easier comparison than something that's a little bit more difficult. Don't make it hard for yourself. You won't lose marks for it. So I would go exposure all the way. You won't have marks taken off you. Right, have I put anything else on here? Right, Kahoot then. So this is a Kahoot I did for you weeks ago. So this is just when we started doing poetry, I think. So this is a feature spotting. So it's a phrase from each of the power and conflict poems, and you've got to identify what language device it is. Oh, that's cute. Vicki rules. I'm gonna get that on a t-shirt. Oh, I forgot to show you that comparison table. Right, we'll get on with this. Remind me if I forget because I've got a head like a sieve. Right. The Lone and Level from Ozymandias, which I think is one of the harder ones personally. I don't take very well to Ozymandias, it's tricky. Alliteration, yet lone and level, so the repetition of the L sound. In Every Cry of Every Man, London, William Blake. Could read Blake all day. Fantastic poet. Yet repetition, so you've got every being repeated there. Lovely stuff. A measured motion like a living thing. I've got a feeling that for some of these there might be more than one answer, so if there's two which you think that might be, then you're probably right in thinking that there might be two that it could be. Simile, yep. So although personification is sort of not too far off, like, because it's saying like a living thing, it's not saying it is doing something in that way. A Heart, How Shall I Say, My Last Duchess. A very long poem and a really tricky and complex one as well. Yeah, rhetorical question. Oh, sibilance. There's only one shirt and one sir, so I wouldn't say it's not a very strong case for sibilance. could potentially say it, but probably wouldn't. There's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die, charge of the Light Brigade. Another fantastic poem. Yeah, so you could have had repetition, or you could have had rule of three, because you've got repetition if there's not to. Fabulous stuff. Streak the Silence exposure. So this is Wilfred Owen. Fabulous. Yeah, brilliant stuff. Blast. You Know What I Mean. Storm on the Island. Seamus Heaney. I think probably one of the more challenging 20th century poems, actually. Fantastic. I think it's surprisingly difficult. And was running raw in raw. That's, I haven't put which poem that is. I think it's Bayonet Charge by Ted Hughes. Fabulous. Yeah, so it runs over onto the next line. I see every round as it rips through his life remains. That's Simon Armitage, our current poet laureate. Yeah, that was Bayonet Charge by Ted Hughes, the other one. Yeah, so it's metaphorical, so it's ripping through his body rather than his life, if you get what I mean. Later, a single dove flew from the pear tree. So that's today's poem. Battered you over the head with this word today. Yeah, so you could have imagery or symbolism. Either of those work. I think I'd head more towards symbolism just because you very rarely get symbolism. He is finally alone with spools of suffering. It's a fantastic line. War Photographer is one of my favourites. Love Carol Ann Duffy. The sun shines through their borderlines tissue. I think probably the hardest of the 20th century texts. It's because it's so abstract. Pathetic fallacy, beautiful. That child's vocabulary I carried here like a hollow doll, the emigre. Fabulous. Yeah, so you've got like there. That should be a little red light in your head when you're reading it. Dem Tell Me, checking out my history. John Agard, another one of my favourite poets. Yeah, dialect, fantastic. Someone who put repetition right is repeated loads of times, but I've only given you that one snippet of an example. A tuner, the Dark Prince, muscular and dangerous. Kamikaze is another fantastic poem. I love Kamikaze. I love the culture in Kamikaze. I think it's super interesting. Fabulous. Oh, it's brilliant to see some of you at such high scores. Lovely. Well done, guys. Fabulous stuff. Right, so couple of other little things then. So I was going to show you this table. Perhaps I could show you it on TES. Actually, no, I won't be able to show you it on TES. So this is on TES. So if you type in TES, and I've shown you the website before. And if you type in, I think like, let's see if it comes up actually, parent conflict, comparison table. Let's see if we can find it. So it's a free resource. So there's a lot of stuff on here which isn't free. And it's one of these. So I don't think this is the exact one I've got, but there's a few of them around and they're really helpful. It's really visual. So you've got a load of themes down the side, and then you've got each of the poems across the top, and then you've got an asterisk for the ones that have the same themes. So for example, abuse of power. So I could go, right, okay, so which ones have abuse of power? Right, so we've got London, My Duchess, Ozymandias, Charge of the Light Brigade, and Remains. Right, okay, so can I see anything else where we've got other things that are in common? So lack of power, so we could say, all right, Charge of the Light Brigade and London looks good. So perhaps I might group all of those together. So it helps you sort of organise your ideas a little bit more. So I'm sure there's several versions of that. I've already found 2 versions, and the version I've got is slightly different. So TES is always good for little revision materials. So yeah, definitely recommend that just for a little bit of revision. I think that might be the same one. However, really good tool if you don't know what you want to compare with, or you're not really sure on how well the poems that you're doing compare. I thought I'd show you a little bit of a reading scheme as well. So this is called the Reading Agency. So if you're sort of thinking I need to read a bit more over the summer, if you go onto the Reading Agency's website, there's some examples of where you can sort of join in with that reading scheme. And there's other various reading schemes as well. The other thing I was going to tell you about was Goodreads. I'm not sure whether I've told you guys about Goodreads before. So Goodreads is absolutely fantastic. I mainly use it as an app on my phone. And it's brilliant. So you can see the books that you've read, you can have your own shelves. So these are what I'm currently reading. I put that in inverted commas because these are things that I've started and never finished. But at the moment, I'm currently sort of swapping and changing with Catcher in the Rye and The Lovely Bones. But you can find new books in here. You can rate them. You can set yourself a reading challenge. I've completed my reading challenge for this year. So it's really fun, and I've been doing it for 5 years, I think. This is my 5th year doing a reading challenge. So it's really nice to look back, and you can look at the old reading challenges you did, so you can see down here the books that I read in that year, and it's nice to sort of think what you were doing and why you were reading those books at that time, what made you choose them. So that's really great. I mainly use the app on my phone, and you can track your progress through the books either by page numbers or percentages, and it'll work it out for a percentage for you as well. So it's a really cracking app. It's really easy, and you can scan your books in as well use the camera and scan the barcodes in, and it sorts it all out for you. So Goodreads is a really good place to go. Right, okay, so I'm going to hand over to Bola briefly. We did have a question, Bola. Let me find what it was. So is there any new group lessons for GCSE other than physics and history?
A very good question. Thank you, Vicki. So I believe that there's some small group sessions available for biology and chemistry, and I think there's also some intro to A-level. But to find out more about all of the smaller group courses available, it is much, the best thing to do is just to go on the small group site. I'll post a link of the small group site in the chat box in a second, and then if you click on it, you should be able to kind of find out a bit more about that. Does that answer your question?
Well, I think that's I think that's fine with in terms of sort of where to go. That would have been the advice I've given as well. Right, amazing. Okay, so if you've got any question, guys, just throw them at me quickly. Right, so yeah, so you're absolutely right. So this is the end of the large group session. So this is our last one today. So thank you so much for you guys who've come lesson after lesson and given me so much joy teaching you guys. It's been absolutely lovely. And being so proactive and asking for sort of places to go and extra bits to do has been absolutely lovely, and I've really really going to miss you guys every week. So thank you so much for being brilliant. Bola, did you want to add anything on to the end of that?
No, I think you pretty much said it all. I think I speak on behalf of the MyTutor team and probably some of the students as well, if not all of the students. And thank you, Vicki, for delivering such amazing sessions week after week. You really do put a lot of time and effort into the resources and the lesson structure, and it really does tell. The sessions have not only have been informative, they've also been very interactive and engaging. So thank you very much, Vicki. And thank you all guys for joining us week after week with Vicki. These sessions definitely wouldn't have been the same without Vicki or yourselves. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm probably going to have to go a little cry now. Right. So thank you so much, guys. Have a fantastic summer. Look after yourselves, make sure you have lots of fun, and read a little bit. I promise it will do you a world of good. Have an absolutely fantastic summer. I wish you all the luck in the world for your studies, and I hope you do really well in English and absolutely ace it. Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to miss you guys so much. Thank you. Bye.